Well, hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I am going to share with you an experience I had today. It was a very good one. There was a friend that came to me and asked, wanted some feedback on a challenge that they were having with a boss. It seems that they were being sent for retraining, and I was an opportunity for them to get reacquainted with some functions regarding their job. And since I've had that on-the-job instructor title for quite some time, it seemed like a really natural fit that they would send this person to me. And I had never met this person before. They were, relatively speaking, they seemed like they had, some experience with the job. They were very capable of doing it. And I'm glad they sent the person to me for some coaching, and I'd like to call it that, just to find out if it was something in the way of a procedure that they needed to learn, or was it more of a mental thing? And in this particular case, I have to honestly say that it was more of a mental thing. Maybe you've experienced this yourself, you the listener, that you've had a friend, a relative, a boss, a coworker, someone that you've had, there's been some point of friction for whatever reason, and it seems like it's very challenging to get around it. Now, for some people, the experience of, say, maybe going and, say, working in another department, that seems to help, at least in the short term, that you're not constantly experiencing that person in your space or being in the experience of their influence, and that way things can cool down. But if you don't have the opportunity to do that, then obviously these things can build, and there can be lots of anxiety around these kinds of situations. And say the situation being you have a boss who's giving you direction, and there's just something about that it just rubs you the wrong way. And in this particular case, I could say I did a little bit of digging and talking to the person and trying to find out something about the problem, and they described it to me. I know I'm being really generic just because I want to protect their identity. But in describing it, like I said, they seem to have the skills to be able to do the work, but somehow the miscommunication with the boss just seemed to be something that could not get fixed. And disappointingly, I would say that this boss had a superior who didn't seem to be very strong in making some changes that I think would help both of them. So what I'm going to talk about here really relates to how do you get around some of these issues. And the attitude going into it, I think, is this. This is something to really, really drive home in your own way of being. And I have had to deal with this in my own experience, and it's that oftentimes things get said to us in a way that seems really mean or coarse, and it is just hard to take because it's been said to you in a way that just rubs you the wrong way. And in those instances, it can be very, let's say, instinctive to react because of how you feel. And over time, I have had to put into place not so much being in reaction and saying the first thing off the top of my head, but just taking it in. Because I know from my own experience that whatever mindset I happen to be in creates a filter with which I am going to be processing whatever is said. That having been, making that known, yes, we do react to ways in which people speak to us. So if they speak to us to a mean and coarse sort of way, we tend to want to call attention to that and make it stop. I'm well aware of those things, and when people in authority do this to us, and obviously it's not in a joking way, then we feel very put upon as to what the heck's going on here. And even in those situations, I've had to, like I say, I've been there. I've had to really stop and think, what is the message? What's the message being communicated? Not so much how it's being said, because I know we can easily get stopped by that. That's the first hurdle. how it's being said. And, you know, you might say, well, why aren't I putting that on the person who's speaking rather than taking that on myself? Because you are the one who has the awareness. You see, we have to go here. It's safe to assume that even though people in authority have been given the power, they aren't always the wisest one in the room. I think many of us have worked for bosses in this experience where there was somebody else a lot more qualified to do the job, but the boss is the boss, right? So take that into consideration and put this in your toolbox of coping skills. And that's to say, think about what the message is. So when responding in these kinds of circumstances, it's not necessary to, if you feel like you've been punched, to have to punch back. I think when these things come at you, it's certainly appropriate to begin to ask questions so that you can drill this down as to find out what the matter actually is. I mean, it may be very simple. It may turn out to be something that is not even connected to you, and the matter is resolved. But if there is some sort of connection, if you have some sort of involvement in the issue, you certainly are going to want to know about it. But it's about how do you get past the hurt feelings when someone has attacked you, which it's probably hurt. You know, there's going to be a little bit of anger and resentment, and beneath all of that is hurt. How do you get past that moment to regroup and then to come back and engage in a conversation? This is the like I say, the skill in the toolbox of coping that a lot of people fail to utilize, or they don't have it, or they don't know it, or they expect it to happen from the other person. And what I can say is, yes, this is a challenge, because if all of us did it, then there would certainly be a lot less conflict. Couples deal with this all the time. You know, when you have somebody who's in your space constantly, you have a relationship with them, and there is a misunderstanding, and when people are in your space all the time, there's obviously lots of opportunities for this to happen. But when things get derailed, then it just seems like it's just a domino effect. Lots of things get embroiled into this attitude of combativeness. And for what it's worth, I think there are a lot of times when we know it's not intentional, but we just can't get ourselves out of that spiral. And what I'm going to share with you are a few ways in which you can do this, one of which is to catch yourself and recognize that you're feeling something. And anger is usually the first thing. Anger and hurt, you know, they're almost synonymous in this really interesting inverse sort of way. We sense that right away. Just like you were to sense joy if someone gives you a nice pat on the back. Being defensive is what I call a survival skill. It's a self-protect mechanism. It's something that kicks in so that it's to stop whatever is attacking you, you know, to make that stop, make that go away. So when someone comes at you a certain way and you're starting to, you know, get the sense that you're not feeling safe or something like that, then you respond, you react. Measuredly, hopefully, but you respond. And it's to call attention to, in this case, the injustice. And hopefully a conversation ensues. See, that doesn't always happen. And when it doesn't, we have to take other steps. I'm going to take a break right here and come back, and we'll talk about this some more.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you And we hope you have enjoyed today's program.
And we're back. So you've had this encounter, or it started, and we're needing to stop this thing from having the domino effect of not only having a misunderstanding right here, but then affecting everything else that you have going on emotionally. The thing to realize for yourself is, hey, are you in danger or not? Most likely, when it's just, these verbal spats that happen, no, you're not really physically in any sort of danger. So you can put that part aside. I mean, if you were, do you call for help? But raising your voice and pushing back really hard against something like that, it only escalates the thing. And quite often we lose containment. And the thing that we don't want to be caught up in is saying things that we'd have to take back later. Because if you're in a work situation, you might be creating a hostile work environment, okay? If you're at home, you don't want to create the hostile environment there, because now you have to be there on a consistent basis. You can't even go away necessarily and cool off and chill out. You're going to constantly be re-exposed to the individual who you've had this rough encounter with, and they have feelings also. So remember, one of my favorite things to do in a situation like this is to take a step back. If body language is something that you read fairly well, when somebody squares off on you, then that's very confrontational. One of the things that you can do to diffuse a situation like that is sort of turn your body to the side. I mean, you can still look at them and make eye contact, but as you turn your body to the side, that's less of a defensive posture in the sense that it's less confrontational. And I kind of liken it to allowing that energy, that anger, to go past you. Because as you turn your shoulders away, anything that was coming at you full on, now it only catch you from the side. And from the side, what are you, about 20, 30% of how you are wide? So then, 70% of that just goes beyond you. So it's about turning your body sideways. Another thing that you can do is you can look away for a moment and sort of collect your thoughts and then come back to that person and sort of do a recap in what you perceive is going on, at least to do that, and ask for clarification so that you understand, and maybe in your own words, mirroring helps, but they may say it in a way that's not very nice. So you can reword it gentler and say, is this the point you're trying to make? Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get to the bottom of what this conflict is. And by saying it in, say, a much gentler tone, then at least you have an opportunity to de-escalate it. So here's what we've done. We've turned away. We turned our body to more sideways. We're still looking at them. Then you can look away, collect your thought, come back and look towards them, and repeat for yourself, is this what you're trying to say? A, B, C, E, D. And after you've done that little bit, you've sort of checked in with them, you've given an opportunity for them to say something, and maybe a few moments have passed and this thing can de-escalate. Maybe it's even better that the two of you can go to someplace a lot less. If this might be a situation where there's other people around, here's an opportunity to take it somewhere else. Talk, they say maybe in a hallway, and come to hopefully a better understanding, because in a private setting, that can oftentimes allow both of you to share whatever's going on in a nice way. without spectators. And I encourage you to consider that as a tool. Now, some people don't necessarily want to be one-on-one with someone if they feel threatened. Certainly don't do that. But a lot of these things are not really about the threatening behavior, meaning you being unsafe. It's about a conversation or something that gets said, and you want to take it elsewhere so that you can clear it up. Because sometimes in the presence of an audience, things just get stirred up, and you're drawing attention to yourself. And sometimes I use the word sometimes often because I see these things can go both ways. Sometimes a person in the, audience might mediate this, help de-escalate. And in other occasions, they tend to fan the flames. You have to be the judge in those situations and decide for yourself. And when you've done this enough, you likely can figure out what's the best way to go. For myself, I generally take the person to a different place and have a conversation about it. When the occasion comes that I have to apologize on my own behalf, then I'm very happy to do that. I can do that in a public way. I don't feel it undermines my standing to apologize. I do like to clearly understand what it is I may have done so that when I'm apologizing, it really has an impact. It's not just something I'm saying to placate someone, because patronizing an individual feels very condescending to the person that you're trying to give the apology to. So you don't want that. But back to the point of how do you have these encounters and then de-escalate them? Like I said, you can turn your body posture sideways. You can look away and then look back. That's not in an essence to dismiss the person. That gives you what I call a reset. You reset the focus. You look away, reset the focus. Because I don't know if you can recall this, but if you're staring at a person, remember how staring seems to be very heavy, very intense, and it seems to stir up some intensity in the other person. So like I say, if you look away and then look back and then say whatever it is, repeat whatever the misunderstanding or their interpretation is, then you can be on the same page and you go forward from there. Those things tend to help. The other thing that I might mention, and this is one of the reasons why you would want to learn how to de-escalate encounters, is because misunderstandings happen all the time. And what many people are not good at is recognizing that it actually is a misunderstanding. We assume, and I say that with air quotes, we assume that when people are attacking us, they feel totally justified. And it's then your job to counterpunch. Now, what I see in those situations is there's a lot going on. There's obviously feelings on both sides, but counterpunching is not conflict resolution. It's almost bullying from one side and wanting to punch back on the bully, when what you have to recognize that what bullies are oftentimes are people who are afraid. Think about that. I'm going to take another break, and I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching.
Hey!
The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we're back. I'm talking about conflict resolution and having these tools in your tool bag so that when you get into these encounters, no matter where they are, this is about fixing your attitude so that you can be a winner, so that you can walk away from these things knowing that you have not lost your standing in society, you have not lost faith in yourself and your ability to be who you are. You still get to be all powerful in your life. And actually, when you have the skill to de-escalate situations, many times you can get to the bottom of the misunderstanding fairly quickly, and then it's gone away. And you don't have to have a fear of walking down that hallway or walking into that room or being in the presence of the person you may have had a conflict with. Because we all know what it feels like when you have friction with someone, and then when you're in their, say, general vicinity, it's you don't know whether you don't want to look over there towards them because you don't want to start something again. We have those. So where I left off before this, the last segment ended, I was talking about bullies and the fact that oftentimes what bullies are is they are people who are afraid. So their way of dealing with the situation is to come off with a strong offense. So your defense isn't so much to go back and counterpunch, but it's really to use the skill of understanding. And you can have all the muscles in the world. That's great. That's even better, isn't it? It's even nicer when you see a person who obviously has a capacity who could do some real damage, but they don't choose to beat the person up. They choose diplomacy. It works. It's very noble, I think, to go that direction. But back to the point of bullies and them feeling afraid, you knowing that, I think should also give you license to want to be in conversation and to talk in a way that's respectful of yourself, choosing words that I think that aren't confrontational, but that represent your point of view. And like I said, there's ways to do that are not confrontational, such as, hey, I understand that you're upset about something. How about we talk about this so that we can both get our feelings heard? And I think we can come to a mutual understanding. See, that there is a positive statement. Say, I think we can come to a mutual understanding. It's definitely sounds like you have something that you want to express, and I want to hear that. When you say it in that way, and that's a nice way. I mean, you could say it in a way like, yeah, I know you got something you want to say, but so, okay, go ahead and say it. That, I mean, it has a little bit of bite to it. And when it's said in the way, this the second way I've mentioned it, it almost sounds as if it's a bit dismissive. Almost as if you were just going to listen just for the benefit of, okay, I'm trying to be diplomatic here. I just want you to say what you have to say so you can go on about your way and I can go on about mine. Now, the first way I mentioned it really sounds as though, look, I want to resolve this conflict. And tone matters. Believe me, tone matters. It's not necessarily what you say, it is how you say it. And I just gave you an example of the significant difference. So when you're mediating or problem solving with a coworker, a significant other, or if you're teaching your kid, if you're making an example of how to resolve conflict between the kids, this is an important tool for them to use. And it's really important to emphasize that mediating your own discussions is not weakness. It is not about backing down. That's really about having the experience and the knowledge and the capacity to listen, having empathy. And these are really, really important tools to have in life. See, these are life skills. You're not going to necessarily make it in the world by punching. And I know a lot of people are good at counterpunching. It's, the verbal sparring, that kind of thing. It can be fun to watch or to listen to and during debate. But when these things become, let's say, heated discussions and feelings are getting hurt, people aren't necessarily being heard. That's not being resolved. That's literally a fighting. And, it just hasn't come to blows yet. And until whatever's causing this, whatever underneath all of this is being addressed, then it's just going to fester. But you have to have the skill in order to resolve these kinds of things. Some people have bits and pieces of it. Maybe they've had a good example of it in their family, or they've seen someone who's really skilled at de-escalating. I think that's a very powerful tool. And it goes well with personalities of people who say are maybe more soft-spoken. And even with the idea that sometimes we think of soft-spoken people as people who are weak, but that isn't always the case. And I can clearly remember an example of this, and it's one of my favorite examples. I have a friend who has taught self-defense for years, and I mean a long time. He's an older gentleman who I believe right now he is easily in his mid-70s. Yes, in his 70s, and is teaching self-defense. You would not know it to look at him. That is, you would not know his age to look at him. But the man has skills beyond skills. He has taught privately for years and years. I've been in his studio and with amazement. Now, this guy would no sooner walk up to someone and tell you what he's capable of doing if it came down to conflict. But in all cases, he has the confidence to know that he can handle himself, but he feels much better at having a conversation, having a discussion. And I've seen this man in action when he's been training, which I think is fascinating because, like I say, you would never know the man's skill set. So the old expression, don't judge a book by its cover, certainly applies. So I want to emphasize when someone is attempting to resolve something through discussion, that is not weakness. That's a skill that's worth having. And you can apply it often in life. Because if you are living long enough, you will have a conflict somewhere, a misunderstanding, a disagreement. And for what it's worth, to be able to mediate those kinds of things in your own life, it's great. Because sometimes we are responsible for the conflict, and being able to get an understanding and apologize and address that can make both of us feel better. You learn more about yourself in terms of where the impact you have on people, and be thankful that you know, because it's something that you can fix. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Thank you for listening.